Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 13th episode of the Federal Crowdsourcing webinar series. We're going to wait a couple of minutes to get started. And so while we wait, I'm going to go ahead and ask those of you who have already joined to use the chat window to tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, your agency. If you're working on an innovation project, we would love to hear about it. And so as a few more people join, we will officially kick off the webinar. All right, hello everyone. My name is Jara Metter. I'm the director of challenge.gov and also citizenscience.gov at the General Services Administration. These two programs represent federal government's use of crowdsourcing, citizen science, and prize competitions, along with an understanding of grand challenges and challenges. And today it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Koo McMahon, who has led the Securing Water for Food Grand Challenge out of the U.S. Agency for International Development for about 7 years. And today, Koo is going to give an overview of Securing Water for Food and some information about how they've used this Grand Challenge model to build a culture for crowdsourcing at their agency. Before we get started, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar. If you need captioning for this webinar, you can elect in the corner to turn on the captioning. In addition to recording this webinar, we will make the recording available on digital.gov at the conclusion of this event. We will be holding all questions and conversations with the host until the very end of the competition. And so throughout this webinar, you're going to be on mute and you will not have the ability to have your video activated. So just so that you know that, but at the end, we should have enough time for you to ask some of the important questions that you may have for Koo. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Koo McMahon for his presentation.
Many thanks, Jer, and thank you for the introduction, and thanks to everyone who's joined today and those who may watch this recording in the future. And so today we're really going to talk about the transformative power of innovation and how you can use the crowd to move the government forward to get a greater impact. And so with that, Katie, we can go ahead and get started. Okay, and so I'm going to cover a few things. One, what is a grand challenge for development? Most of you may know, but some may not. And then specifically how SWIFT got started. And then I'll start talking about the crowdsourcing models that we've been using and some of the things we've learned. At that point, I'll talk about, since the program has come to an end, what were the next steps and the follow-on items. Next slide. And so in general, a grand challenge for development is a way in which you can have a very big problem and bring partners together, usually governments, but sometimes foundations, sometimes corporations, to mobilize around a very important topic or issue. It also lends itself fairly well to places where you've got 2 or 3 different things coming together at once, where you may need scientists plus researchers plus government folks to then solve those problems and challenges. And so with that, the idea is no one foundation or no one government alone has the resources to solve that problem or challenge. And so, but together we can achieve more, and we can move a little bit closer to impact. Next slide. And so just to give you some context, at USAID, we've got now more than 12 grand challenges that have been started over the last decade, where we put in about $425 million, and we've been able to crowdsource in partners who put in over an additional $1 billion of funding. And so it's been a very large effort, and they cover the gambit, like mine, of the agriculture water nexus to healthcare, health value chains, off-grid energy, education, as well as democracy and governance. And so many things, some of them are very short-lived and only 2 or 3 years, and some, like saving lives at birth, have been going on for almost a decade. Next slide. And so why are we doing this? What we have come to know is that water scarcity is not only something that was a problem 100 years ago or 50 years ago, it's a problem right now, and it's only getting worse because of climatic impacts and changes in weather patterns. So right now, about half of the global population is living in potential water scarce areas for at least 1 month a year, and this could go up to 5.7 billion global citizens by 2050. And 73% of those that have that water scarcity challenge are in Asia. This is especially becoming severe because of changing weather patterns, reduced snow melt from the Himalayas, as well as reduced or shifted monsoons. And then in the Mekong River Delta, salinity and salinization in combination with upstream dams. So for a bunch of different reasons, that's happening in Southeast Asia. And then in addition, you've got through the Middle East and North Africa, increased drying patterns, as well as in East Africa, sometimes very severe droughts, and in Southern Africa, changing weather patterns and changing rain patterns. So all of these things affect the production of food and agriculture, and also people's ability to sustain themselves. Next slide, please. And so just to give you a sense of how this started, Sweden, back in 2012, put out a public notification that they wanted to work at the nexus of water and agriculture, and said, we're looking for partners, unbeknownst to USAID. At the same time, USAID's leadership, the administrator, announced that he wanted to do a grand challenge around water. And so I kind of came in looking and working with our water office around potential avenues and opportunities for us to create a challenge. And so first we looked at potentially doing one on sanitation, and then one just on water security. And then when we got in touch with Sweden, they said, well, let's do it around this nexus of water and agriculture, and we'll put in $14 million. And so USA was like, well, that's a lot more than we were planning to put in, so great. And so that grew. And so Sweden and the US came together for the water reuse and efficiency side of things, as well as the water capture and storage. And then about 6 or 7 months later, our Dutch colleagues got in contact. They heard about the potential initiative and got in contact with us and said they were in if we would add salinity and saltwater intrusion. And so between the 12 million from USAID, the 23 million, I'm sorry, the 18 million from CETA, and then an additional 8 or so million from the Dutch, we ended up together putting forth $34 million in donor funding to focus on water reuse and efficiency, water capture and storage, and salinity and saltwater intrusion. The big picture goal was, rather than do traditional government procurement processes or even grants, where you say, we understand the problem, we're pretty sure on the solutions, and we want someone to go implement the solution. We were saying, This is a very big challenge. We don't know all the solutions, but we're looking for new ones. And we're looking for everyone, from researchers to university people to businesses to NGOs to local governments, to come together to help us potentially solve these challenges. And so in the end, we had a secondary approach to that, which was, not only do we want to provide these organizations with grants, we want to provide them with technical assistance and business facilitation and capacity building to help speed up the rate at which they're going to have impact. And so in total, we were able to support 40 innovators from 35 countries. The awards we gave for the first, third, and fourth rounds of the program ranged from $500,000 to $2 million, and that was dispersed over a 3-year cycle. In the second round, which in fact JR ran, the DSAL prize, we ended up giving out prize amounts. And so people actually, it was a competition where they brought their technology and they all competed with the same source water against each other. But all the other rounds were based on the traditional model that I just described. Next slide, please. And so the SWIFT ecosystem was a bit larger, in fact, than some other ecosystems around grand challenges. As I said, they all depend upon partnerships and working together. But in this special case, that technical assistance became a core part of the program, which I'll talk about a little bit more. In addition, we had outside advisors from outside the government, business people, development experts, technology experts, especially in the water space and the agriculture space, who could help us find the best and help us review to see if the things that we were getting really were best in class, or they were just the best idea someone had in a small location. But at the core of the program were the different innovators that we were supporting. And so for us, it was important to make sure that not only did we have diversity in types of innovation, we also wanted to make sure we had geographic diversity and also from a startup mentality kind of diversity. So we didn't have support that many innovators outside from the US. Most of them were from the developing countries we were trying to work with for those developing countries. So 70% of the innovations that we supported were from those areas. In addition, as I noted before, we were partnered with Sweden and the Netherlands. About a year into the program, we realized that we needed a developing country perspective, not just in the things we were supporting, but also in the management structure and the steering committee. And so we were thankfully able to work with the South African Department of Science and Technology, and they joined us on the steering committee. And we also then had some of the folks in the technical assistance facility, which I'll talk about them in a bit, who were able to come on and help move us forward. Next slide, please. And so our process was fairly simple. It was a 3-step process. First, we needed to understand what was happening in the world in general around innovation. What were the types of innovations that were available that we already knew about? What were the gaps? And also, why weren't people able to use the ones that were already there? Then we worked to figure out from the innovator and the innovation perspective, what were the barriers that they were trying to solve, the barriers they couldn't get over, which was preventing their solutions from having widespread adoption. And then also we wanted to have things that were proven. So the one exception was the DSAL prize. We were looking at experimental things, but all the other rounds, we were looking for post-pilot technologies or post-pilot business model solutions that were able to impact a significant number of people in the tens of thousands range. And so we would put out a call for innovation with these clear criteria. One of them was always trying to either impact women or have women as one of the key focus areas of the innovation, and hopefully even have women in the management team. And then we would convene a diverse panel of qualified judges from the private sector, academia, government, and they would judge the applications based on the innovation's viability, the likelihood that it would be long-term sustainable from an environmental, social, and technical perspective. As I said, making sure that there was gender inclusivity and the likelihood of the innovation or business model to make enough money to self-sustain and be viable. And then the plan was, once we found them and we brought them into the process, we then would provide intensive financial and technical support to them, have structured pick days with investor circles, and a rigorous media and PR effort to shine a light on those innovations so that they would be more likely to get outside investment and funding. Next slide, please. And so our process was circular, cyclical, whichever way you want to say it, that first the innovators would apply through the call for innovations, and then we'd have, and I'll talk about this in a moment, the Innovation Investment Advisory Committee would then review those applications and make recommendations. And then before they got an award, there would be some government paperwork they'd have to fill out. Then we'd make the award and they'd start to receive funding. Now, what was very different about securing water for food as opposed to some of the other grand challenges done by USAID is that we used milestone-based funding. So that if the organization did not meet their milestones, at the end of the year, they would become SWIFT alumni, which means they still were part of the program. They still were able to, potentially join us at some of our convening events, and we'd still talk about them positively if good news happened in their organization. But they didn't continue to receive the technical assistance, nor did they continue to receive funding. If they did meet their targets, then they would go back around the cycle into the next year, and they would go around that loop 3 times until they, after 3 years, they would take the off ramp to become graduates, which means they met their targets and milestones and therefore qualified for that status. And so it was a process by which we had flexibility with those milestones. Sometimes there was an act of God, a drought, a famine, locust, etc., which meant they couldn't meet their milestones. Sometimes they just didn't have the data yet, so we put a pause on their award until we could get the quality data we needed to determine whether or not they met their milestones. And sometimes, especially around the business ones, they needed some flexibility. And so we would raise some in some cases and lower them in others. But they were generally sticking around the overall idea that they were going to reach for our tier 1 innovations somewhere north of 10,000 customers or end users within the 3-year period. And for our tier 2 larger awards, somewhere between 500,000 to 1 million customers or end users. And so we had about 36 tier 1s and 4 tier 2s in the program. Next slide, please. And so, as I was talking about before, we had the 4 different rounds, 3 of them being calls for innovation and 1 being the prize. And so this just gives you a sense of the comms metrics related to each of those rounds. And interestingly enough, you can see in the 4th round, I think because we had been established for a bit, our communications were better. We were able to work more through our partners, and we were able to reach down into more local networks and industry organizations to promote the call. We got a lot more visits to the website, even though we ended up getting about the same amount of applications. I think it was about 555 or so. And so the number of applications we got ranged from the low 500s to 600 or so. But the quality of the applications changed over time. That in that round 4, we had more higher quality applications, and the diversity got better. So from round 1, we did not have a lot of East Asian organizations or Southeast Asian organizations participate, nor did we have a lot from certain countries. We had English-speaking countries primarily, like South Africa, India, and we had a few other organizations. And so then that second round, the DSAL prize, that was based, as I said earlier, around looking for a solution that fit, because we saw a gap. There was no technology available that farmers could use that could deal with brackish desalination water. So for that one, we got 60 applications, and that was a Teams process from 29 countries. Next slide. And so to give you a sense, as I said, Swift innovations were from 35 countries. Primarily, they were from Africa, both West and East Africa, as well as Southern Africa and the Middle East and North Africa. We did have a strong South Asian contingent and a few from Southeast Asia. And then we had one or two in South America, as well as one or two in Central America. But by and large, East Africa and Southern Africa and South Asia were the majority of the innovators, either were originally started or where they were focusing their operations with their SWIFT funding. Next slide, please. And so the most important thing that we realized as the program was starting when we were trying to get it together is that a lot of grand challenges always talked inward. They talked, you know, the government people would talk to each other and build and create something. And so they weren't necessarily getting the most diverse solutions. And so what we decided to do was look outward rather than inward, source once again from the crowd of technology experts and business experts to have them sit on our panels. They actually were willing to participate for free. The only thing that they got from us was we would bring them together to convene in person, and we just pay for their hotel and per diem. But otherwise, we didn't provide any sort of allowance or stipend for their participation, which was amazing. Next slide, please. And so, as I said, the IAC's focus was to help provide us with the most technically sound, commercially viable solutions, and help us to guide us on what milestones were best, what targets were more realistic based on what they knew from what was happening on the ground in a lot of these different places. So it started by the donor partners going out and finding some experts and asking for recommendations. And then we got, I think it was a total of 18 people, about 6 on each of the 3 panels, innovation, sustainability, and business viability, who would participate. And at first, they were mostly from developed countries, but then over time, as some people would choose to stop participating and rotate out, we would rotate in people from developing countries. So by the end, I think it was 50-50 developed to developing country participation. And then the way that it would work was when we would bring them in, they would review all of the high quality applications and narrow us down to finalists. Then they would interview the finalists along with the donor partners, and we would make decisions on which organizations got awards. And then every 6 months, they would come back into the process and see what was happening with those innovators, have a spot check, and see if they needed any assistance or if they could provide any advice. And then at the end of the year, they would see if the innovators had met their targets or milestones, and then make a recommendation whether or not the innovators should move on to the next year or become alumni in the program. Next slide, please. And so I've kind of already talked about this. On the technical side, they were looking at water and ag expertise. And then on the business financial, they came with private sector expertise, but they also were able to provide sometimes mentorship, sometimes specific examples to innovators of other business models that may work for them, or also why they may be walking down a slightly dangerous path with some of the business models or some of the things that they were going to try to do. And our sustainability folks were really looking at the whole gamut, from the gender side and gender lens to how it potentially could affect a local economy, as well as, you know, differences in youth programming, and was it really impacting the right people. And so from all these different lenses, these different types of people would come into the room, bring their different perspectives, and kind of have a battle dome over who we should select. And everybody learned from others in the room. So that actually, for the IAC members, one consistent thing they told us after the first 2 years was they didn't ever have a chance to experience anything like that before, where they could see all different perspectives, and it really improved the quality of their decision making and also helped the program out. Next slide, please. So the next part of that process was the acceleration work plan. So unlike what you often get with a grant or even a contract with government, is, you know, where you have this process where you they put together a PDF document of a work plan, and they're going to send you a report every 6 months. We just wanted to really reduce that because we were working with often people who never worked with government before. So we didn't want them to have an onerous burden as far as paperwork. We didn't want them to have to write reports and spend most of their time doing that. So rather what we did is we just put it all together. So their targets and milestones and the indicators for those, we put into kind of an Excel file along with how they were going to collect data on those targets and milestones, what were some of the risks with those things, as well as what technical assistance and capacity building and acceleration support they might need to achieve those milestones. And so that was an annual process that started before the year began and then happened right again at the end of the year to determine once we knew whether or not they were going to move forward to the next year. Next slide, please. And so to give you a sense of the milestones, it was a little bit fuzzy on here, but if you, as Jared said, if you go to Secure and Water for Food, you can see them all. Number of customers or end users, how much they were able to reduce agricultural water consumption compared to traditional practices, or how much water was reallocated to the food value chain, or how much they were able to increase water storage capacity. Those are kind of the three water metrics. And then on the food side, how many hectares of farmland were being impacted, how many hectares of grazing land were relevant, and where had we been able to increase crop yields and the total mass of crops grown. And then, so those are the technical. Then on the financial milestones, the matching funds and the external leverage they were able to capture, the amount were relevant for product sales that they had, what their profit margin was. And one of the key things for the program was not only did we as donor partners want to make partnerships, we also required that any of the innovations we supported made partnerships, because we knew that innovation by itself is not enough, and that they don't have enough information or money to really do everything in one shop. And so by going out and finding partners, it helped them do some of the things that they maybe not have had the in-house capacity or technical expertise to do, but find others to help with. And then as you can see across the program, those who got most of the X's ended up becoming alumni. Those who were mostly green means they met most of their targets. And sometimes you get a mixed bag where they meet some and don't meet others. And generally those folks at least made it through the first year, if not the first 2 years, but sometimes didn't make it through the third. Next slide, please. And so as I was talking about our process, so first thing would happen is our technical assistance facilitator and I and the M&E manager would work with the innovator around their acceleration work plan, milestones, and targets, and how they're going to gather evidence. We would also do every year innovation needs diagnostic and the scorecard. So we could see, and it was a self-check from the innovator. So they do a self-assessment, and then we review their self-assessment to see where we thought it was accurate. Then we come back together to say after the diagnostic what the needs were and have an acceleration support call to talk through, all right, what did they think they needed for the year? What did we think they needed for the year? And then they would come up with the narrative around the acceleration work plan that would then come back to me for approval. And then we would go out for the different scopes of work for delivery. So once again, looking out to the crowd of vendors, and I'll talk about them in a minute. And then at the end, once the scope of work was delivered, then the innovator got to evaluate the quality of the scope, delivery through a quality of service survey. So that helped us evaluate for all these different organizations who were providing the technical assistance, which ones should we keep working with and which ones should we let go. Next slide, please. And so for that technical assistance, we had 4 lines of support. So we talked to the innovator about what they needed, and then we'd see, well, where are we going to get that from? Could that technical assistance facility team through the Kaizen company contract, could they deliver it themselves? Should it come through USAID or its partner network? We had this external group of vendors, this voucher system of vendors. Should they provide it? Or could we get some of the support through either volunteers or associates or interns? And so we would look at the degree of alignment, which one was the most cost effective, who was available, and with the innovators' input, which of those might be the best fit. Next slide, please. And so that voucher system of vendors had 21 different technical service categories. And as you can see, from supply chain development to travel services to legal advisory, PR and communications, media presentation and coaching, investment facilitation, environmental review assistance, gender, smallholder farmer marketing. So a gamut of services. And we primarily, especially in the last 2 or 3 years of the program, had local vendors. So the vendors were generally either in the region or had dealt in developing country capacities that were similar or relevant to the region to provide the technical assistance. One of the things we changed from the beginning of the program to the last 2 or 3 years is we also added a step so that for the final 2 vendors who potentially were, well, the final 2 vendors in the competition who were potentially competing for the scope of work were interviewed by the innovator, so we could make sure as part of the process that they were brought in and bought in, so it was more likely that the scope of work would have the intended impact and buy-in from the innovators. Next slide, please. Yep. Excuse me, folks, give us a moment. Looks like we're experiencing a technical difficulty. Thanks. And so what we were able to do, because, you know, I'm a big data person, so I made the team collect data on everything, including, as I said, those quality of service scores. So what we were looking at every year was what was happening with the innovator satisfaction with the technical assistance that they were receiving. And so as you can see, over time, because of the changes we were making and pivoting while we were providing assistance, the responses got better. So one of the things we saw, so as you can see, year 1 to year 5 or so, is that for the local vendors, so those are the ones that were based in Africa and Asia, their scores weren't so good at the beginning, but it got significantly better over time. And then similarly, the scores for our non-local vendors that were either based in North America or Europe did get better, but kind of petered out for a bit. And then at the end, they got better. And so what was happening there is in the beginning, we were using our non-local vendors to provide all of our support. They didn't understand the local context in some cases. And so as a result, we weren't able to get buy-in from the innovators because they felt the people who were providing the technical assistance didn't understand what was happening on the ground, that sometimes it took 3 or 4 months to get an approval of a permit from the local government, or sometimes people just go on vacation for 2 months, and that's just how it is. And so when you're working with a Silicon Valley investor or incubator, they just didn't understand it. So basically they weren't talking well to each other. And so we instituted some changes in how we did the technical assistance, how we monitored it over time. We put a few more touch points from our technical assistance facilitator into the process to make things go a little bit more smoothly. In addition, we started to have our vendors self-select into the quality and to the capabilities that they were most well suited for. So the investment facilitators weren't trying to also provide marketing support anymore, that they kind of narrowed their focus. And then our developing country expertise, they broadened their focus. Between the two, both sets went up over time. And our goal was always to be above a 4, because that was an 80% score. And so at first we weren't there, we were barely there, and then we were able to make it work over time. Next slide, please. And so you go to the next slide. And so when we talk, one of the other things that was really important for the program, as I said, I love data, and it was important for a bunch of different reasons. One, we needed to understand how the acceleration work planning was going to go and to see where things were going off the rails. And two, to help provide additional technical assistance and make sure we understood what technical assistance worked best for which types of companies or organizations, because sometimes we had not-for-profits. On the innovator side, it helped them with indicator target development. And also, a lot of them learned a lot through the program about how to collect and capture data and use it as market research and business intelligence and business forecasting, which they'd never done before because they weren't customer focused. And so the program helped them go from being innovation focused to customer and end user focused. And that really improved their ability to sell and grow to impact larger markets. And then on the USAID side, we used it not only for this grand challenge, but it helped other grand challenges understand what worked and what didn't work and how to improve upon them. Next, and it also, above all other things, it helped us see where we were failing to try to pivot where we could and abandon where we couldn't. Next slide, please. And so I can't see exactly the top of the slide, but one of the things that we changed in the program, I think about halfway through, is well, from the beginning of the program, these are all over the place, and I and one or two members of the TA facility team would go to a performance monitoring site visit to understand what was happening on the ground, what was happening with the innovation, with the company or organization that was supporting that innovation, and the customers or end users around that organization, and any partners the innovator might have. And so those were very time consuming, and the innovators really wanted us to come soon, and, at the very beginning of an award, and there were a lot of them. So that became very hard for me and the team to do. And so where we did it, it was great, but there were sometimes, I'd go out in the field, or my team and I would go out into the field, and we could only be out there for 2 or 3 weeks, and we'd interview, 30 to 50 customers, maybe. But we needed a better way to do that. And so one of the other things that was important to the program is working with young people. And so what we decided was to, reach out to colleges and universities for master's level and PhD level students or recent graduates who conduct in-country external field research for us. So we would develop the survey and the instrument. We would send them the list of customers and end users. They would work with our innovator to make sure they had what they needed on the ground. We would provide them with a stipend, and then they would go out and do a cluster randomized sample so that we would have quality data about what was happening with these innovations around impact level things. So gender, how much income changes for agricultural yields, what was changing there, what types of crops they were doing for productivity, all of those things. And so it was independent from the program, and it was also something we could give to our external evaluators so that they could use it, because they were doing a mirrored match pair, but it really increased their total sample size from about 300 customers or end users to more than 1,200 by the end of the program. Next slide, please. And so what happened after all of this? Well, the program impacted more than 7 million farmers and their families in the 5 years that our innovators were out in the field, and helped farmers produce more than 6.8 million tons of food, and also enabled them to reduce their water consumption by more than 19 billion liters of water. And that actually was amongst just 3 or 4 of the companies we supported. And as you can see, where the program expected it to be, we thought we'd only have about 3 million customers or end users impacted at the end of 5 to 7 years, and we were more than double that. And similarly with water, we were quadruple what we expected. So significant impact, and it was because we believe, one, milestone-based funding to help, protect the government's interest as far as not spending money on things that aren't working, and 2, help motivate the innovators to move forward. Next slide. One of the other things that we really wanted to do was get a better sense of how do you compare apples to apples across things that are very different types of technologies. And so we started doing right at this last year of the program as it was wrapping up, and we had all this data from our field evaluators. We could do cost benefit analyses and social rates of return. And so the SWIFT portfolio on average had a 41% return on investment. And that's basically taking the amount of money that we spent on grants, as well as technical assistance and capacity building for each of these organizations, looking at the impact that happened over their 2 to 3 years if they made it that far, or 0 to 1 years if they were alumni innovators, and then looking at that over a 3-year time frame and then at a 9-year horizon. And so what we found was overall, when looking at all of the innovations, they added more than $1 billion to 10 nations' economies. And that was based on our 35 million, well, really it was $34 million investment of the program. So a significant social rate of return. And so you have to compare this, or let me rephrase, you don't have to. We were comparing this first to what standard USAID rates of return on a cost benefit analysis, and that was in the 10 to 13%. And for investors, they're looking usually for 21 to 30% return. So we got a really good return on our investment for what we put in. Next slide, please. And so another way to look at it is for every $1,000 of that 35 or 34 million we spent, what did we get back? So for every $1,000 we spent, we impacted 265 end users, reduced water consumption by more than 1 million liters, and water reallocated by 3 million liters, had increased sales from these companies by $625, impacted 4,000 hectares of grazing land and 165 hectares of farming land. So lots of impact. So the one good thing about collecting all that data is now we could see what was actually happening, not in real time, but within 6 to 9 months after it occurred. Next slide. So the big picture lessons learned is that local is better, that investment facilitation was something that we didn't do in a direct way and a focused way that we should have, that gender integration has to be at the forefront, it has to be in the calls for innovation, it has to be in what the technical assistance is going to be, and it's got to be in how you're going to look and evaluate the program, and that evaluators should be at the program's start, not in the middle, not the halfway point, and definitely not at the end. Next slide, please. So as far as where this went is I was ready to leave. I said, let's wrap this up. Good job, let's leave. But the other donors weren't so ready to end. And they said, hold on, we want to keep this going. We want to learn from these lessons. We want to pivot and do better. And we want to merge with the sister grant challenge around the energy agriculture nexus. And so we created the Water and Energy for Food Grand Challenge and added Germany to the other donors to build on the Securing Water for Food and Power Agriculture lessons learned, to continue the crowdsourcing model, to increase the localization, because now rather than run it from Washington, we have regional innovation hubs based in each of the regions that will be able to provide better direct technical assistance, and most importantly, improve the enabling environment because they can engage with local missions and embassies and regional actors, whereas we couldn't do that in the SWIFT program because it was based in Washington. Next slide. So as it was already said, you can learn more at securingwaterforfood.org. We have our final report there. We also have a failures, pivots, and lessons learned report that may be of interest to folks. So with that, thank you very much for your time, and I'll leave the remainder of time for questions.
Ku, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to hear about the progress and successes of the Securing Water for Food Grand Challenge. While we're waiting for questions to come in via the chat box, I'll go ahead and monopolize your time because I have a lot of questions, having seen this amazing report and presentation. Do you anticipate seeing a crossover from the crowd that you've developed for SWIFT to the new Grand Challenge for Food for Energy?
Yes. So one of the reasons that the other donors wanted to do water and energy for food is they saw the progress a lot of the innovators had made, but they felt that if we didn't give them a little bit more push, not necessarily with grant funding, but especially in the technical assistance and the investment facilitation, that they may not make it. They may not get to where we really wanted them to go. So a lot of the graduates, you know, at a minimum, reached 10,000 customers or end users. Some of them reached, you know, in the hundreds of thousands. And we had two that reached more than 1 million. One was about 1.2 million. The other was about 3.4 million. So we want to work with some of those old innovators to move them forward, and then also find a whole new set of innovators that we can help and move forward.
Yeah, that's insightful. I was really impressed by the return on investment values that you put forward at 41% and the cost benefit analysis as it compares to the traditional 10 to 13 range at USAID. When you're thinking about those return on investment numbers, can you point to any like one thing or a couple of things that you provided as services from your TA facility that drove home those return on investment values?
You know, it's interesting. So our external evaluation, it should be made public probably in the next week or so. And so we'll post it to the website for all of you, and I'll send it to you, Jared, so you can send it out to GSA. What they found was, from the innovator perspective, the things that were most important to them were, they had a love-hate relationship with those milestones. They hated them because obviously they just want to get the money, but they really liked it because it gave them a focus. Many of those businesses did not have a North Star. They just wanted to do good, but they didn't think about all the ways in which they needed to measure that. And so it gave them a North Star about the progress they needed to make. And many of them said they wouldn't have made nearly that progress had they not had those milestones. One of the innovators from Egypt specifically said, you know, is an International Center for Agriculture that had existed for 30 years. That they made more progress in 2 years working with securing water for food than they had in 15 years on that same innovation. And it was because of the push. So that between the Technical Assistance Facility, the Innovation Investment Advisory Committee, and USA and the donors, we were encouraging positively them to move forward. So the milestones was one piece, and then that technical assistance, that was the #1 highly rated thing. And it mostly was around customers and end users, understanding their markets, how to reach their markets better in more efficient ways, and different parts of the market segments that they may have not seen before.
Thanks, Q. So we have a question from the crowd. Jeff Morissette is asking if you could explain how a partner would have about a 40% ROI, but a negative profitability.
Sure. So this is because so to be clear, the return on investment is looking at it from USAID and the donor's perspective, not from each company's perspective. So for example, if I've got a not-for-profit organization, they aren't trying to make a profit, they're just trying to get by. And in a few cases, they were always looking for more donor dollars, is what I call them, the donor, those who were dependent on donor funding. They, in those cases, weren't going to be profitable, but compared to the money we gave them, to the impact they had, it was a very good return on our investment, both on the income increases that farmers were getting, the agricultural productivity increases, and in some cases, the gender benefits, because we were reaching different market segments. One specific example for that is in Bangladesh, it was a not-for-profit organization. It was a sandbar pumpkin thing, where basically they were giving destitute farmers who couldn't put in much land and basic agricultural inputs and training them. And then a year and a half later, they'd leave. And so then the farmers were on their own. They were able to keep it going. And we saw more than 5,000 farmers who kept this going by the time our external evaluation ended, 3 years after, and saw significant, in some cases, over $3,000 which is very significant in Bangladesh. On average, across the program, if I remember correctly, it was about, based on what the external evaluators told us, It's about $1,800 per farmer on average for a year for them as a return on investment using the innovations. And 95% of the farmers said they would continue to use the innovations and suggest that others use them. 70% of the farmers, based on the external evaluation, said it had had a positive impact on them.
Okay, thanks for that. Craig Connolly out of NIST Boulder asks, he states that one of the lessons learned in the program report was about structure versus informal and teach each other collaboration versus external expert leading the group. Can you discuss how these lessons are broadly generalizable versus unique to the goals of SWIFT?
Sure. And so, and Cassie, if you're still on here, if you want to chime in with me in a moment. So one of the things that I learned the hard way at the beginning of the program. So, the donors, we had this plan, we had the technical assistance facility, we were going to have these events where we bring the innovators together, and we were going to have these structured trainings, and they hated them. And we look at, results from things and we do reviews, and they all got negative reviews. And I was so frustrated. And I was telling the technical assistance facility, what's happening? Why is this not working? And it wasn't the quality of the trainers. These were high quality people. They were used not only in the US, but throughout Europe. And what I realized was the innovators were learning more, talking to each other about what they were hearing than just hearing it. And so what we did is we changed the way we did innovator interaction, and we went to this unconference model where the innovators came up with the challenges, the topics they were interested in talking about. If they had someone who could deliver it, one of the innovators who had experience with that would then, or one or two, they would then lead that session, share it with the group, and they were short, usually 50 minutes to an hour, and then we'd rotate. And as a result of that, they were sharing lessons learned. It helped them realize what they didn't know so that we as a program could then help them fill in those gaps, and allowed them to make partnerships based out of that. And we've continued that model in water and energy for food. We just ran an Ag Energy Prize with our Southeast Asia regional mission, where we did a co-creation workshop, and the same thing happened. Though there was instructor-led training, we did these co-creation models where they'd have these spaces where they could both ask the questions and teach each other. And as a result of that, two of them are now partnering to make a regional platform for Southeast Asia. And that only took them about a month and a half. So I think that is a generalizable model where you don't expect that experts are going to be able to tell people. These people are experts in their own right. They're running businesses. Maybe there are things that they don't know or understand that we need to help them figure out, but they can teach each other sometimes better than we can help them.
Thanks, Coop. As a person very familiar with your process for structuring data as part of an initiative, can you give this crowd some pointers for how they can design a program, an open innovation initiative with key performance indicators and metrics and methods for collection upfront in their process?
Sure. Number one, know what your North Star is. I often see in challenge and prize programs, they just want to do something for the sake of doing it, or because they got a mandate from some political, but not thinking through what it is you really are going to be able to meaningfully achieve during the time of the program. Number one, know how long you think the program's going to last. Know what you think meaningfully can achieve. Keep it simple. So I'm building a new program now, and we're doing with the monitoring and evaluation. And the thing I always have to both remind myself and my M&E folks is that you cannot collect all data under the sun. There are only certain things. Collecting data has a cost, and both a person time cost, and it has monetary cost. And so have a few metrics that you're going to collect on well, rather than have 80 metrics, which I often see, and make the metrics relevant to whatever group it is you're working with. So if you're collecting a bunch of things that make the government look good, but aren't at all relevant to the people you're trying to impact or the people you're trying to work with, then you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot.
Thanks, Ku. And Cassie just let us know that they do have an unconference guide available on the resources page on the SWIFT website. And if anyone here has a question that they want to ask you directly, how do they get in touch with you?
Sure. And so if you go to, well, now I guess it's water and energy for food. There's a contact, and there's like different, I just want to ask a question. I'm an investor. I forget what the other one is. So they can go there and send the question. And then Katie and Cassie, those get funneled to me. So that way they can get it to me quickly. And usually people check that every 2 or 3 days. So I'm very responsive. So once I see an email, I usually respond within 24 hours.
All right, thanks, Q. And I implore anyone on this call who's interested in standing up a grand challenge model or infusing data and metrics and sort of that North Star into their design to reach out to the Securing Water for Food and the Water and Energy for Food teams here. And I want to thank you, Q, for taking the time to give this overview of your amazing work over the past 7 years at USAID. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure the rest of the community has as well. And so,
Well, Jerry, thank you so much. I appreciate bringing me on. So it's good to be able to talk, because I remember the last time we talked, we were only about a third of the way through. So I was like, well, I don't have so many results yet. It's kind of an experiment. Let's see what happens. And so it's good to be able to share the results of the experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a successful experience it has been. And we can't wait to learn more about how you're taking the learnings from this grand challenge, melding them into the new grand challenge, and then also all the different ways that you're going to innovate on that to meet the goals that you've set forward. So thanks again for the work you do, and also to your team for managing a complex but purposeful process. And
Sure. So just one plug on that. We're kicking off the new Grand Challenge at the beginning of September. And Katie, you could put the link in there. And so, if you're interested in what the new program is going to look like and some of these other lessons learned, we're going to have a whole week of lessons learned, well, webinars around that. And then specifically, both for SWIFT and our sister Grand Challenge, Power and Ag, in October going forward, we're going to have specific topics with lessons learned webinars. So happy to share with this community any of our specific things, and they'll be more in depth than I was able to go into today.
Oh, so great, so great. We look forward to receiving that information and cheering you all on as you make this amazing impact. So thank you. All right, with that, we're going to conclude the webinar for today. Thanks to everyone for your attendance and for the great questions that you volleyed up for the SWIFT team to answer. And with that, we'll see you all next month for the next episode. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.